My grandmother and I lived there in a simple adobe house with a tin roof. There weren't many of us, my parents, my 3 siblings, my grandparents, and me. Despite the poverty, I remember those years fondly. The smell of bread and coffee at night was essential. I also played hide and seek with my friends, and the sound of the church bells at 6 o'clock filled the air. But there was something that always frightened me. For as long as I can remember, the call of the owl. In the village, there was a saying that everyone repeats with respect and fear: when the owl hoots, the soul rises, or the Indian dies. No one knew exactly where that phrase came from, but everyone took it very seriously. According to the elders, the owl, a nocturnal bird similar to an owlet, announced death, but not just any call. When it announced its presence, it was a call very different from its natural one. It wasn't something said simply out of suspicion, because many times when one of them called near a house, someone would die within days. In front of my grandmother's house stood 3 enormous trees. I always looked at them with respect because there, at the very top of one of them, an owl would always perch. The first time I heard it, I was about 9 years old. It was night, around 8 o'clock. My grandmother was praying the rosary, and a long, deep call was heard from the tallest tree. They all looked at each other in silence. No one said anything, but my grandmother murmured, "She's done it. Someone's going to die." 3 days passed, and the news arrived. A neighbor who lived several houses away had died suddenly. I didn't fully understand, but I felt afraid. The second time was stranger. A woman from the neighborhood, Juanita, had been sick for months, and everyone knew she wouldn't recover. One afternoon around 7 o'clock, my mother and we went out to buy bread. The sky was already dark. As we passed the lady's house, we heard the flapping of something. We looked up, and there it was. The owl flew out of nowhere and perched in a tree right in front of her window. It hooted 3 times. Someone near us whispered, "He's coming for her." 2 days later, we woke up to the news that Juanita had died. We heard it a third time when Mr. Ramon, a beloved man in the village, died. That night, we were all having dinner at home when the hooting sounded louder than ever. It was as if it were right above the whole village. My grandmother got scared and said, "That hooting isn't for just anyone." The next morning, the school announced that the teacher had died of a heart attack during the early hours. The 4th time was even more unsettling. My Uncle Pedro had gone on a trip, and we hadn't heard from him. One night, with the wind, a light breeze, and a heavy silence, the owl hooted again. This time it didn't perch in any tree. It simply circled above the house and then landed in the yard, its call sounding like a lament. My grandmother angrily went out to the yard with a broom and chased it away. But 3 days later, news arrived from San Cristobal. My uncle had died in a truck accident, his trailer overturned in a ravine. The last time I heard him hooting was the one that affected me the most. A neighbor, whom everyone called Auntie, was strong and healthy. No one imagined anything could happen to her. One ordinary night, the hooting of an owl broke the silence of the town, and this time it wasn't 1 or 3, it was 7 hoots in a row. "That's not normal," my grandmother said, her face pale. The next day, Auntie fell gravely ill, and in less than 2 weeks, death took her. As the years passed, I left home, grew up, and started my own family. And now, I live in Mexico City. I often think about those days and that call that always foretold something no one wanted to hear. I don't know if it was a coincidence that the owl appeared before each death, or if there really is something beyond that we don't understand. My name is Julian. I'm 30 years old, and I live in a small town in Spain called Vilafranca del Bierzo in the province of Leon. I've never been much of a believer in paranormal things. I always looked for logical explanations for everything, until something I experienced in my 20s made me doubt everything I thought about death. At that time, I had a best friend. His name was Alvaro. We were inseparable. We went out almost every weekend, drank, laughed, and talked about everything. We were like brothers. We met in high school and had an incredible connection from then on. But suddenly, from one day to the next, everything started to get strange. One time, around midnight, I was in my apartment getting ready for bed. I lived alone in a small apartment. It had a window that faced the street. I was already half asleep when I heard 3 soft knocks on the window. I thought it was the wind or a branch. But when I opened my eyes, I saw Alvaro leaning out the window. He was laughing with that same smile of his. I got up, surprised, even excited, because we hadn't made plans for that night. "What are you doing here?" I said, laughing, as I went to open the door. But when I opened the door, there was no one in the street. I looked both ways for him, and it was completely deserted. I thought maybe he was playing a joke on me. The next day, we met as usual. I told him what had happened, and he burst out laughing. He said he hadn't left the house, much less at that hour. I kept telling him I'd seen him and that he'd been at my window, but he insisted he hadn't, that I should ask his sister if I didn't believe him. I didn't press the issue, but I was left with a strange feeling. A few days passed, and one Sunday, when I had some free time, I decided to go to the cemetery to leave some flowers for Claudia, a childhood friend who had died as a child. It was a custom I kept up every now and then. The Villafranca cemetery is quite large, and I was at the far end. From where I was, I could see almost everything. While I was arranging the roses on the grave and cleaning it, I looked up and that's when I saw him. Alvaro was walking slowly along the front of the cemetery. His hands were brushing against the headstones on either side. He seemed calm, almost as if playing, his gaze fixed straight ahead. I froze. I thought maybe he'd gone to visit a relative without telling me. I whistled the sound we'd always used since we were teenagers, a sound only we understood, but he didn't react. He didn't stop. He just kept walking until he came out the main gate of the cemetery. I ran after him. I had to catch him. I had to know why he was acting like that. But when I went outside, he was nowhere to be seen. I walked around the nearby streets looking for him, but nothing. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. So I went straight to his house. He opened the door for his sister, who greeted me with a smile. I asked her where Alvaro was, and she said he was in the living room, that I should go see him. I saw him there, sitting on the sofa, as if nothing had happened, wearing the same clothes I had seen him in when we were at the cemetery. I felt a chill run through my body. "Why didn't you wait for me at the cemetery?" I asked him. "What are you talking about?" he replied, confused. "I haven't left the house all day." I laughed, thinking he was joking again, but his sister confirmed what he said. She told me he had been there all morning and hadn't gone anywhere. I knew what I had seen. It was him. It was impossible to mistake him. Even so, I decided not to argue. I stayed with him until late. We talked about everything, laughed as usual, and ordered pizza. That was the last time I saw him alive. 2 days later, I received the hardest news of my life. Alvaro had an accident at work. He slipped and fell from the 3rd floor. He died instantly. When they told me, my world collapsed. But what disturbed me most was remembering that night I saw him at my window and that day at the cemetery. Sometimes I think it was a kind of warning, a premature goodbye his soul tried to give me without him even knowing it. My name is Daniela, and this is the story of how my grandfather began seeing my deceased grandmother weeks before he went to be with her. I don't want to embellish or exaggerate. I'm going to tell it as it happened. Our house. Several of us lived in my grandparents' house. My parents, my siblings, some aunts, my cousins, and me. It was a simple 2-story house. Downstairs was the living room with a sofa that was long overdue for replacement, the table in the center, and the kitchen at the back. Upstairs were several bedrooms, as well as a patio. My grandfather slept in the downstairs bedroom in the corner. Since my grandmother died, that room became quieter. My grandfather fell into a bit of a depression during that year. He hardly spoke to anyone anymore. But before I get to the strange part, let me tell you a little about them, because what happened is related to their story. My grandparents met outside a movie theater in the 1960s. My grandmother's name was Susanna, although my grandfather always called her my Susanita. She was in line to see a movie with her friends. It was a rainy afternoon. My grandfather was walking by. He didn't have money for a ticket. He was just going for the bus. The rain started pouring down, and he approached her with a half-broken umbrella. "I'll hold it over for a bit while it passes," he said. She laughed and thanked him, saying he was a gentleman. He stood there like an idiot, holding the umbrella high, watching her. They didn't go into the movie theater that day. They stayed chatting under the awning of a store until the rain stopped. The following week, he went to her work with a red carnation. They danced at the San Miguel Fair to a song that would later become like their own. My grandfather always said it was from the era when people danced music close together, a song from the 50s. They married very young and were together for 60 years. My grandfather never laid a hand on her. I repeat that with pride because he used to say it himself when I was a child. You speak kindly to a woman. If I can't control my anger, I'll just walk away. And that's how it was. My grandmother died a year before what I'm about to tell you. Her last months were difficult. Hospitals, prescriptions, short walks around the patio so she could get some sun. My grandfather was devastated when she left. He would cry quietly in the kitchen with his coffee cup in his hand. Sometimes he would forget to eat. Sometimes he'd turn on the TV just to hear voices, but he also did things that were endearing. He'd put on that song, his song, and hum it while he washed the dishes. He said that way he wouldn't forget her voice. It all started about 6 weeks before he died. It was early morning around 3 o'clock when we suddenly heard my grandfather shout from his room, Come quick!" We all thought he'd fallen because his knees were giving out. My dad and I ran to him. We opened the door without knocking and found him sitting on his bed, but he wasn't hurt. He was smiling. His eyes were bright like a child's who has a secret. "What happened, Grandpa?" I asked, scared. "Oh, how beautiful you look, my love, just like when I met you." She said it with a smile on her face. He said that Susanita also reassured her not to worry, that she wouldn't feel any more pain, because by then, my grandfather had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. That night we stayed silent. My dad touched his forehead, and my aunt took his pulse. Everything was normal, but my grandfather was still happy. We hadn't seen him like that in a long time, but my aunt told him that perhaps it was just a dream, that he should go back to sleep. My grandfather, excited, said that if it was a dream, he hoped it would happen again. We went back to sleep, shaken but convinced that he had only dreamed. The next day, my aunt told him not to be so alarmed, that you shouldn't say things like that because then you'll regret it. He smiled, and that night he talked about her again, and the next night too. He didn't shout about it anymore. Sometimes we'd hear him at 2 in the morning, talking quietly, laughing. I have the room next door, so I could hear his voice clearly, as if he were on the phone with someone. He would say things like, "Do you remember the fair?" Or, "I still have your handkerchief, Susanna." It made me happy to hear him laugh because he wasn't crying for her anymore, but it also made me nervous about my grandfather's mental health. But then, strange things started happening, the kind you can explain, but altogether they don't make much sense. For example, the house would suddenly smell of roses, not always, just occasionally, but it was always in my grandfather's room. When you went outside or came down the stairs, you'd be hit by that strong smell. My uncle said maybe someone had left an air freshener open. We looked, but there was nothing. The days went by, and I could still hear my grandfather. One night I was about to fall asleep. I heard soft music playing in my grandfather's room, that same song they both had. I stayed in the doorway without going in. I just listened to my grandfather's weak footsteps for several minutes. The next day at breakfast, my grandfather said it as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Last night, I danced with your grandmother," he said. "She asked me to put on our song, and I did." "And who did she dance with?" my brother asked, half jokingly. "With your grandmother." "Who else?" he answered and laughed to himself. We didn't press the issue. My dad, worried, took him to the doctor. They checked his blood sugar, his blood pressure, everything. They said everything was fine, all things considered, that the dreams about his wife were part of the grieving process, that he could take a pill to sleep more deeply. My grandfather agreed to it, but I don't think he was actually taking it because we kept hearing him talking in the early hours of the morning. A couple of times I caught him in the kitchen preparing 2 cups of tea. He would leave one across from the other on the table. I would tell him that one was enough, and he would smile. "It's just that your grandmother takes her tea hotter. We have to leave her cup." He would also leave a plate with 2 cookies, Maria cookies, just the way she liked them. That really gave me goosebumps. But later I believed him. One night my grandfather became seriously ill, and they had to take him to the hospital. Everyone left, except me. I stayed to look after the house. It was already like it was 11 o'clock, and I was in bed when I suddenly heard my grandfather's wardrobe open. I know it sounds strange, but we all know the noises in our homes. The creaking of the wardrobe is very particular because it's rigid. It doesn't open by itself. And a few seconds later, the door reopened. It started to close slowly. I froze. No, and it just closed, just the zipper, as if someone had taken something out. That time my grandfather came back 2 days later feeling a little better. But my grandfather started talking about dates. Your grandmother says he almost mentioned one afternoon. "Susanna is coming for me in the next few days. If you're awake, please don't cry." It was an awkward moment. Nobody knew what to say. My aunt broke the silence by asking if I wanted more food. I touched her hand and she smiled at me. I asked him if he was scared, but he said no, that he was more scared when she left. That night before falling asleep, I don't know why, but I started praying. I don't usually pray much, but I did. I fell asleep late, dizzy between the idea that it was all a dream and the possibility that it wasn't. I woke up at 5 a.m. with chills. It wasn't a noise. It was like an alarm going off in my body. I went to the bathroom. When I came out, I stood for a second in the yard. There was that smell of roses, clearer than usual, stronger. I knocked on my grandfather's door. "Grandpa, are you okay?" He was silent. I knocked again, but nothing. I opened it. Everything was dark except for the radio, which was on. The music was playing. That music they kept very quiet because the rose scent was strong. My grandfather was in his bed, half on his side, the blanket pulled up to his chest. His left hand was outstretched like when you're inviting someone to get up. He had a small smile on his face. I spoke to him, but he didn't answer. I screamed. I started crying and calling for help. Everyone came running. My dad tried to revive him. He spoke loudly to him, but nothing. We called emergency services. They arrived quickly and confirmed what we already knew. While all this was happening, the music kept repeating over and over. Nobody noticed at the time. I only remember that sometime in the afternoon we realized it. That overwhelming rose scent faded away too, like perfume disappears when you open a window. I won't lie, it hurt. I cried for days on end, but at the same time I didn't feel that black hole I felt with my grandmother. I don't like to portray this as a miracle or a story. For me, it was my grandfather saying goodbye in his own way, and my grandmother fulfilling what they always did, coming for the other when it was already now. Whether it was the mind, whether it was love, whether it was something I don't understand, it doesn't matter. I was there, and I lived it. My grandfather sensed his death. My name is Rodrigo, and this is a story that, even after so many years, I still find difficult to tell without getting a lump in my throat. It has to do with my father, with his passing, and with something that began long before he died. My father's name was Esteban. He was a quiet, peaceful man, very devout. He liked to get up early to water his plants, read books, drink coffee, and sit in the patio watching the afternoon go by. He was already retired. He didn't talk much about his emotions, but it was clear that he always thought everything through calmly. About 2 months before he died, he started telling me about a strange dream. At first, I didn't think much of it because I thought it was just that, a dream. But then she mentioned it every morning as if she had really experienced it. She told me that she kept dreaming about that beautiful garden, a huge place full of flowers and a bright sun that didn't burn, that everything was peaceful and solitary, but that there was someone else there. A tall, thin man wearing white clothes like cotton wool and no shoes. He was always walking slowly toward her. The first time she told me, the man was very far away, barely a dot at the back of that garden. But as the days went by and we talked more and more, she told me the same thing, that now she saw him much closer. That dream became part of our routine. In the mornings, while I washed the dishes or did something else, we talked about the man in the garden as if he were real. At first we said it jokingly, but later when I noticed that my dad wasn't dreaming about anything else, my mom and I started to worry. One night we were watching television in the living room, the usual news program, when he said to me without taking his eyes off the screen, "He's almost right in front of me." "Who?" I told him, "That man gets closer every night. I think he wants to tell me something." I didn't press the issue, but that phrase kept running through my head. The days went by as usual. Dad watered his plants in the morning, helped Mom, and in the afternoon sat and watched the sunsets. But something about him had changed. He was calmer than ever, as if he had no worries at all. Sometimes I saw him close his eyes and smile for no reason. One Saturday afternoon, while we were having a drink, he said to me in a serene voice, "I think he's waiting for me. That man already told me I have to leave. Don't tell your mom anything, please." "Who?" I asked, a lump in my throat. "I don't know. The man in the garden." I didn't want to believe it, but deep down I knew something was wrong. A week later, my dad died. It was unexpected, since he had no health problems. At the hospital, they said it was due to a cardiovascular issue, but it was a peaceful death, without pain, as if he would have simply kept walking in that garden he talked about so much. After he left, the house changed. At first, we thought it was our imagination, that it was all part of the grieving process. But what happened the first week was all too real. The first night, around midnight, we heard footsteps on the roof. At first that they were soft, then they grew louder, like someone was calmly pacing back and forth. My brother went up, but he didn't find anything. No sign that anyone had been there. 2 days later, the noises intensified. They weren't footsteps anymore, but like furniture being dragged. It sounded like someone was moving heavy things around our house. We all ran upstairs thinking it was a burglar, but the roof was empty. The third night was the most terrifying. There was a loud, sharp knocking on the front door in the early morning, like someone was kicking the gate. We ran to open it, thinking it was an emergency, but the street was empty, completely silent. There were no cars, no people, nothing. Then, around that time, the dog started acting up. My dad's little dog was always happy and playful, but after his death, he changed completely. Every night at 9 o'clock, he would sit in front of the door and begin to howl with a deep, mournful sound. Sometimes he would scratch at the door as if he wanted to come in. Other times, he would just stand there staring inward. This went on for 7 nights, but then it all stopped. The footsteps, the banging, the furniture being dragged, and the dogs howling. Everything stopped suddenly. as if whatever had come had already left. Today, every time I visit my dad's house, it feels different, like it has a strange vibe. For some reason, my dad's room is always colder than the rest of the house. I don't know if it was a premonition, a warning from beyond, or simply the way the soul prepares to depart. But when I think of that luminous garden and that man in white who slowly approached each night, I like to believe that what my dad felt wasn't fear, but comfort, and that when the moment came, my dad simply walked to meet him.